Jesus had the power to shake the earth, yet his first miracle was almost invisible. No thunder, no crowds, no dramatic rescue, just water becoming something it should never become. But why start here, and why so quietly? What was he really trying to reveal in that moment? Because the answer changes everything you think you know about him. Welcome to Lord's Quiet Whisper, where the silence speaks and the unseen reveals what the world has overlooked. You are standing in the space between prophecy and fulfillment, where the echoes of Isaiah 7:14 still linger. A virgin shall conceive. And yet the story seems to pause after Luke 2:7, where the child is laid in a manger, fragile, unnoticed by kings, yet announced by heaven itself. You follow the early glimpse of his life in Luke 2:40, where it says the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And then suddenly, a moment breaks the silence. Luke 2:46-47 reveals a 12-year-old boy in the temple, sitting among teachers, astonishing them with his understanding. A child who speaks with authority beyond his years, leaving even his earthly parents searching in confusion, as he quietly declares in Luke 2:49 that he must be about his father's business. And then, nothing. The narrative fades. The divine voice goes quiet, and for nearly 18 years the Bible offers no detailed account, no miracles, no sermons, no public signs, only a single, almost hidden line in Luke 2:52, saying he grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man, as if the most powerful preparation in human history was happening behind closed doors, away from the eyes of the world. You begin to wonder, what kind of life was he living in those years in the ordinary town of Nazareth, a place so overlooked that Nathanael once questioned in John 1:46, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And yet, this is where the Son of God remained, not as a king, not as a teacher, but as a carpenter, as Matthew 13:55 subtly reminds, working with his hands, feeling the weight of wood and sweat, living among people who saw nothing extraordinary, while inside him the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, like Isaiah 53, was quietly forming. A destiny of suffering, rejection, and sacrifice that no one around him could fully see. You can almost feel the tension, the waiting, the restraint, as if heaven itself was holding its breath, because the one who would later command storms was for years choosing silence. The one who would raise the dead was living unnoticed among the living, and the question begins to press deeper into your heart. Why would God hide his Son during the very years the world might have needed him most? What was being prepared in the shadows that required such stillness, such patience, such mystery? And more importantly, what if those hidden years were never meant to be empty, but instead were the most crucial part of the story? Something so profound, so intentional, that it was felt, but not fully written. And if that's true, then what exactly happened in those silent years that shaped the moment when everything would finally be revealed? But what if the silence was never absence? What if it was strategy, a divine concealment where every unnoticed moment was shaping the greatest revelation the world would ever witness? You begin to sense that those hidden years were not empty at all, but filled with a kind of preparation so deep, so intentional, that it could not be rushed or revealed too soon. Because the same scriptures that foretold his birth were also whispering about his suffering, like Isaiah 53:3, describing him as despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, and yet here he was, living among those very men, walking past them in ordinary days, carrying within him a destiny they could not recognize. And you realize something unsettling. He was not hidden because he was unknown. He was hidden because the timing was not yet fulfilled. Just as Galatians 4:4 later reveals that when the fullness of time had come, God sent his Son, meaning every silent year was part of a precise, unstoppable plan. You can almost see him in Nazareth, shaping wood with steady hands, feeling splinters and weight, living a life so human that it almost disguises the divine, fulfilling what Hebrews 4:15 would later affirm. That he was tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin, meaning those unseen years were not passive. They were a battlefield of obedience, discipline, and quiet endurance, where no crowd applauded, no miracle was displayed, yet heaven was watching every moment. And then you start to understand the deeper mystery. Deuteronomy 8:2 speaks of how God leads his people through wilderness, to humble and test them, to know what is in their heart. And what if Jesus, though sinless, walked through his own form of hidden wilderness, not to be corrected, but to fully experience the weight of humanity before stepping into his mission? You feel the tension building, because while the world moved on, unaware, something irreversible was approaching, like a quiet storm gathering strength beneath calm skies. And then suddenly, the silence begins to crack. Matthew 3:16-17 reveals a moment where heaven finally breaks its restraint, the Spirit descending like a dove, and a voice declaring, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," as if those hidden years had reached their completion, and the identity once concealed could no longer remain in the shadows. But now a new question rises, more intense than before. If those years were necessary, if the silence was part of the plan, then what does it mean for you? In your own unseen seasons, when nothing seems to be happening, could it be that the silence in your life is not rejection, but preparation? And if so, what is being formed in you right now that has not yet been revealed? And what if the most dangerous misunderstanding you could make is believing that silence means God is not working, when in reality, it may be the very place where your purpose is being forged? You begin to realize that those hidden years of Jesus were not just about him. They were a reflection of a pattern, a divine rhythm that still unfolds in lives today, including yours. Because when the voice from heaven finally declared in Matthew 3:17, "This is my beloved Son," it wasn't the beginning of his identity. It was the unveiling of something that had already been fully formed in secret, something cultivated in years. No one applauded, no one recorded, and no one understood. And suddenly the words of Ecclesiastes 3:1 start to echo differently. To everything there is a season to be seen and a season to remain hidden, a season to speak and a season to be silent. And you can almost feel the weight of that truth, because even Jesus did not rush the process. Even though he carried the power to transform the world, he chose restraint, waiting until the exact moment appointed by the Father, as John 7:6 quietly reveals. "My time has not yet come," meaning the waiting was never weakness. It was alignment, it was obedience, it was trust in a timing greater than human urgency. And then it hits deeper, more personal. What if your unseen struggles, your quiet efforts, your unnoticed growth are not delays, but divine construction? Just like those years in Nazareth where heaven was shaping something eternal behind ordinary routines. You start to see it differently now. The way Luke 2:52 describes growth, not just in wisdom, but in favor with both God and man. A balance of inner transformation and outward readiness, as if God was preparing Jesus not only for miracles, but for rejection, for betrayal, for the unbearable weight of the cross that was already written in prophecy long before, like Psalm 22:16, whispering about pierced hands and feet, long before it ever happened. And now the silence doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels intentional, alive, almost sacred, because if the Son of God walked through years of being unseen, then maybe your hidden season carries more meaning than you ever imagined. But here is where the mystery deepens, because once the hidden years ended, everything changed rapidly. The miracles, the teachings, the confrontations, the path to the cross. It all unfolded with unstoppable intensity, as if the silence had been holding back a flood. And that leads to a question that refuses to stay quiet. If God prepares in silence and reveals in power, then how close are you right now to a moment that could change everything? And are you ready for what comes after the silence breaks? Because the silence was never the end of the story. It was the setup for something the world would never forget. You feel it building, like a quiet tension finally reaching its breaking point. Because after years of being hidden, after a lifetime of restraint and perfect timing, the moment arrives. Not in a palace, not before kings, but at a simple wedding in Cana, where something unexpected begins to unfold. In John 2:1-3, there is no crisis of life or death, no storm to calm, no demon to cast out, just a quiet embarrassment, a shortage of wine, something small in the eyes of the world. Yet somehow this is where everything changes. And you notice the hesitation, the almost mysterious response of Jesus in John 2:4. My hour has not yet come, as if even now the timing carries a weight deeper than anyone in that room can understand. Yet something shifts, something unseen, and then it happens. Water, ordinary, untouched, suddenly transformed into wine. Not just any wine, but the best, as John 2:9-10 reveals. A miracle so subtle that many don't even realize what just took place. And that's where the deeper meaning begins to rise, because this was never just about wine, it was a sign. The first unveiling of glory, as John 2:11 calls it. A quiet declaration that the hidden years were over, and the divine identity was now stepping into the light. You start to see the layers, the water, often used for purification in Jewish tradition, representing the old ways, the rituals, the law, now transformed into wine, something richer, deeper, symbolizing a new covenant, a coming shift from external cleansing to inner transformation, from law to grace, from ritual to relationship. And suddenly, it's not just a miracle. It's a message, a preview of something far greater, because wine would later become a symbol of his blood, as hinted in Matthew 26:27-28, poured out for many, meaning this quiet moment at a wedding was actually pointing forward to a sacrifice that would shake eternity. And you realize something chilling. The first miracle was not loud, not explosive, but intentional, almost hidden. Just like the years that came before it, as if Jesus was revealing a pattern. God does his deepest work where few are looking, and reveals it only to those who are paying attention. But here's the part that changes everything for you. Because if the first miracle carried a hidden meaning, if it was more than what people saw, then what about the rest of his works? What about the cross? What about the resurrection? How much have we truly understood? And how much have we only seen on the surface? And just as the celebration continued, most people unaware of what had just happened. A much bigger story had already begun to move forward, unstoppable, leading toward moments far more intense, far more costly, and far more revealing than anyone at that wedding could have imagined. So the question is no longer just what he did, but what it all really meant. Because in the next moment, the miracles won't stay hidden, the truth won't stay subtle, and what begins as a quiet transformation will soon turn into a revelation that challenges everything you think you know about him. So don't miss what comes next, because the deeper meaning behind his miracles is about to be revealed.